I met an angel in prison. What he said shocked me. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. This is the story of one of our subscribers, and what he experienced inside prison will leave you speechless. Now, let's get started. From an early age, Joel Reichlin felt like he didn't fit into the world around him. When he discovered the Grateful Dead movement, it was like he had finally found a family. It was more than just music. It was a culture, a philosophy, a refuge for those searching for something beyond the ordinary. The problem? That search for belonging came at a cost. At first, drugs were just a complement to the experience, something to expand the mind, heighten the senses, open doors to new realities. But, like so many others, what seemed like harmless exploration quickly became an invisible prison. Joel dove deep into the New Age world, exploring astral projection, out-of-body experiences, and anything that promised a connection to something greater. But instead of finding answers, he was pulled into an even darker abyss. Over time, the light drugs gave way to the heavy ones. LSD, heroin, cocaine. What once felt like freedom had turned into addiction, and addiction needed to be funded. That's how Joel got into dealing. A one-way road. At 18, he got caught. His sentence? Anywhere from 3 to 15 years. No guarantee of freedom. No certainty of a future. Standing before the judge, he realized that for the first time, his so-called free journey had led him to a place he couldn't escape. What he didn't know was that prison would be the start of the most unbelievable turning point of his life. Prison wasn't like in the movies. There was no suspenseful background music, no heroes plotting revenge against villains. It was just a bunch of guys stuck in the same hole, trying not to lose their minds. Joel quickly realized that nobody cared about his story in there. He wasn't special. It didn't matter where he came from, what he dreamed about, or what he thought was. Right or wrong, if he wanted to survive, he had to learn the rules. And the first rule? Never show weakness. Easier said than done. He felt the weight of that place on his shoulders all the time. The cramped cell, the terrible food, the constant noise. But the worst part was the loneliness. Even surrounded by people 24/7, Joel had never felt so alone. Then one day, after a stupid fight, he completely broke down. Sitting on the cell floor, his face bruised and his pride shattered, he felt a tight knot in his chest that wouldn't go away. And that's when something happened that he never thought he'd do. He prayed. It wasn't a well-crafted prayer full of fancy words. It was just an honest plea, a raw confession. Lord, I can't live like this anymore. I need someone I can relate to. That was it. He didn't even know who he was talking to. He just threw the words into the void. The funny thing? He wasn't expecting anything in return. But something changed in that moment. He didn't realize it right away, but his prayer had already been heard. 2 weeks later, he met Cedric, and nothing was ever the same again. 2 weeks after that prayer, Joel stepped out into the prison yard expecting nothing different. Same place, same faces, same suffocating routine. But that day, something or someone broke the monotony. In the corner of the yard, a man was playing soccer alone, bouncing the ball against his foot with almost hypnotic precision. He was thin, dark-skinned, and had a calmness that felt out of place in there. Joel couldn't explain why, but he felt drawn to that guy. Maybe because before everything fell apart, he had always loved soccer. Maybe because there was something about him that just felt different. Without thinking much, he walked over. "Pass it over here." The man stopped, looked at Joel, and smiled. A peaceful smile, like he already knew this meeting was supposed to happen. Then he rolled the ball toward him. "You play?" he asked, with a Caribbean accent. Joel took a clean shot. "Since I was a kid." The conversation flowed naturally. His name was Cedric. He was Jamaican and had an interesting story. He said his mother had been a nanny for Bob Marley's kids. Joel laughed. That was the kind of thing any other inmate would say to impress people. But Cedric, he said it so casually, so confidently, that it felt impossible to doubt, and that little detail was enough to make Joel feel comfortable around him. Like after so long, he had finally found someone who didn't make him feel like just another number in prison. He didn't know it yet, but that meeting wasn't random, and Cedric was about to change everything. What was so special about this guy? What did he know that Joel didn't? In the days that followed, Joel noticed that Cedric wasn't like the other inmates. He wasn't aggressive, he didn't try to assert dominance, and most of all, he seemed at peace. And that was weird, because nobody was at peace in there. Even when tensions rose, when the guards shouted, when the air felt heavy, Cedric stayed the same. Calm, confident, like he knew something that the others didn't. Joel started spending more time with him, and that's when he realized Cedric was completely in love with Jesus Christ. He talked about God like someone talks about a person they know personally. But the way he did it was different. Cedric didn't preach trying to convince anyone. He didn't force his faith on people, he just lived it. Joel, on the other hand, wanted nothing to do with religion. He wasn't an atheist, but he didn't think he needed to change. To him, all of this just sounded like nonsense. "Man, I respect your faith, but I'm not religious," Joel said one day as they shared a piece of bread in the cafeteria. Cedric gave him a small smile. "Who said I am?" "You talk about God all the time." Cedric shrugged. "I talk about Jesus. Religion doesn't save anyone, Joey, but he does." That answer stuck in Joel's mind for days, not because he wanted to believe it, but because it was impossible to ignore. Cedric wasn't a fanatic. He didn't have that desperate look of someone trying to convert the world. What he had was something much rarer in that place, unshakable certainty. And no matter how much Joel resisted, something inside him started to shift. He accepted Cedric's invitation to a Bible study with a few other inmates, just to check it out, just out of curiosity. What he didn't expect was that in that small group, among simple prayers and words that felt like they came from somewhere much greater than those prison walls, he would start to feel something different for the first time in his life, something he couldn't explain, and that feeling would only grow stronger from there. What happened next was so surreal that Joel even started doubting his own eyes. Joel had seen a lot of strange things in his life, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what happened that night. They were walking around the prison yard like they did almost every night. The conversation was light, nothing too deep. Then, out of nowhere, Cedric stopped walking. His face grew serious, his eyes closed, and without warning, he started speaking. But it wasn't English. It wasn't Spanish. It wasn't anything Joel had ever heard before. Cedric's voice sounded different. It wasn't just the language, it was the intensity. He spoke with a force that felt like it was coming from somewhere else, and as he spoke, tears rolled down his face. Joel froze. A chill ran down his spine. "Cedric, what are you saying?" "Man!" Cedric kept going. His voice shifted between strength and deep emotion, as if he were delivering a message that didn't come from him. Joel looked around, uneasy, trying to make sense of what was happening. And that's when he realized they weren't alone. A few feet away, a Muslim inmate had stopped and was staring at Cedric. His face was pale, his eyes were wide. "How does he know that?" the man murmured, almost breathless. Joel didn't understand. "Know what?" The Muslim man pointed at Cedric, his voice shaking. "He's speaking in Aramaic." Joel blinked, confused. "What?" "He's saying, 'God is here. He is calling you.'" Joel felt like the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Aramaic? Cedric had never mentioned speaking another language, let alone an ancient one that wasn't even used in everyday life, but there was no doubt about it. The Muslim inmate, was trembling from head to toe. His eyes filled with tears. And then he did something no one expected. He dropped to his knees. Slowly, he removed his kufi, the religious cap he always wore, and held it tightly in his hands. His voice came out low, choked with emotion. "I want to serve the God that you serve." The scene was so powerful, so surreal, that Joel felt his entire body break into goosebumps. He couldn't explain what he had just witnessed. He didn't know what to believe. But one thing was certain. If you thought this was strange, wait until you see what happened next. Joel was starting to accept that strange things happened around Cedric. But what he witnessed that night went beyond anything he ever thought was possible. His parole hearing was coming up, and the anxiety was crushing. He tried not to show it, but Cedric noticed. "You're worried, aren't you?" Cedric asked, pushing his food around on his tray in the cafeteria. Joel let out a dry laugh. "Of course I am. Do you know how many guys try to get out and don't make it?" Cedric set his spoon down, wiped his mouth, and looked at him like he was about to say something serious. "You're getting out," Joel frowned. "How do you know that?" Cedric smirked slightly, like he knew a secret Joel hadn't figured out yet. "I just do. God has already decided." Joel rolled his eyes. "Sure, Prophet, if you say so." He tried to brush it off, but those words kept echoing in his head all day. And that night, something happened that Joel would never forget. They were in the yard, Cedric on one side, Joel on the other, when the atmosphere suddenly changed. The air grew heavier, denser. A thunderclap exploded in the sky, so loud that some inmates flinched. Cedric stood up. Joel watched as he raised his hands, as if feeling the electricity in the air. "You will leave this prison," Cedric repeated, louder this time. "And you will preach the gospel to the world." At that exact moment, the sky lit up with a massive bolt of lightning. But it wasn't just any lightning. The flash came right after Cedric spoke, as if the sky itself was answering. And then something even crazier happened. As Cedric moved his hands, the lightning followed his gestures, like he was commanding the storm. Joel's blood ran cold. "What? What's happening?" Cedric looked at him, his eyes burning with intensity. "You still don't get it?" Another thunderclap boomed, so close it felt like the sky was splitting in two. Joel did what any sane person would do in that situation. He ran. He bolted across the yard, his heart pounding. This wasn't normal. It couldn't be. It had to be a coincidence. It had to be, but deep down, he knew it wasn't. Something much bigger was happening, and whether he liked it or not, he was part of it. He just didn't know that the biggest twist was still coming. After that night, Joel avoided Cedric. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to hear anything more about God or destiny. Everything was starting to freak him out. But one thing wouldn't leave his mind. What he had seen with his own eyes. The storm. The thunder. The way Cedric seemed to control everything. No one in that prison could explain what happened. Some inmates whispered about it, others ignored it. But Joel knew that was not normal. And then something even stranger happened. The next morning, Joel woke up and went straight to Cedric's cell. He needed answers. He needed to ask what the hell was going on. But when he got there, Cedric was gone. His bed was empty. No clothes, no note, no trace of him, nothing. Like he had never been there. Joel looked around, confused. He asked the other inmates. Nobody knew anything. He asked the guards. No record of a transfer, no explanation. Maybe they deported him, a prisoner suggested. But it was weird. Too weird. Joel felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He leaned against the wall, trying to process it all. How does someone just disappear from a prison? Then, for the first time, a completely insane thought crossed his mind. What if Cedric was never just another inmate? What if he was never a prisoner at all? The doubt tormented Joel for the rest of the day. But what he didn't know was that the biggest shock was still ahead, because Cedric would appear to him one last time. And when that happened, The truth would finally be revealed. 2 months after Cedric's disappearance, Joel was called for his parole hearing. He had no hope. So many inmates had tried before and failed. Why would it be any different for him? But deep down, something nagged at him. He remembered Cedric's words. "You're getting out." He remembered the storm, the thunder, the way everything seemed to follow a plan that wasn't human. And then, in a room filled with over 100 inmates waiting for their chance, the impossible happened. He was the only one set free. It didn't hit him right away. He only grasped the reality of what had happened when he stepped outside the prison gates. He was free. The wind brushed against his face. The sun seemed brighter. He took a deep breath, trying to take it all in, and right there, in that moment, the unexplainable happened. That night, while sleeping in a small bed at a shelter for former inmates, Joel had an experience different from anything before. He didn't know if it was a dream. He didn't know if he was awake, but suddenly he saw his own body lying there. It was as if he was floating above himself, wrapped in a strange, opalescent light. And then he saw him, Cedric. But this wasn't the same Cedric from prison. He looked different, much bigger, much brighter, like he was radiating with a different kind of energy. He didn't speak with his mouth, but Joel heard his voice inside his mind. "I told you, Joey." A deep chill ran through Joel's spine. It was him. But then, he noticed one detail that made his heart stop. Cedric was holding a Bible. But it wasn't just any Bible. It was made of pure light. And in that instant, Joel finally understood. Cedric wasn't an inmate. Cedric was never there by accident. Cedric wasn't from this world. He was an angel, a messenger sent to guide him, to prepare him, to show him that God had always been there, waiting for him. Joel woke up with his heart racing, his body covered in cold sweat. But inside him there were no more doubts. The prophecy had come true. He was free, and from that day forward he dedicated his life to preaching the gospel to the world, because now he knew. Angels exist, and he met one inside a prison.